Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. I'm very excited to be here to tell you about strategies for increasing a communicative language in teaching environment in an English for academic purposes course. This is something very personal for me as I am an instructor at an adult high school and I teach language arts courses to predominantly immigrants, recent immigrants to the United States who are working on enhancing their language skills for high school graduation and possibly thereafter going to community college and university programs here in the United States. So, what I'm hoping to focus on today would be strategies for enhancing a communicative language teaching environment in an English for academic purposes course. So, I'd like to look at a couple of pedagogical approaches that have been successful for this, but also I'd like to touch on a few challenges that we as instructors encounter when we try to increase oral participation in our classes. I think we've all faced the situation where we walk into a classroom very excited, ready to go, great lesson planned, and we just meet a wall of silence. So I'm hoping that some of the ideas that I share with you today will be helpful for overcoming the silence that we encounter as instructors and finding ways to truly connect with our students and encourage them to participate orally on a more regular basis and tie that into their future goals. So I'd like to touch on a few ideas here today from the beginning to give you a bit of an outline for my presentation, a couple of objectives that I hope to achieve. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the research question, which is how can a communicative language teaching environment be maintained and sustained in an English for academic purposes class with specific learning objectives? So after presenting this, I'd like to review this question, try to define exactly what it is I'm looking for. Thereafter, I'd like to touch on 5 themes that I encountered from the literature review when I was researching this question. Thereafter, I'd like to apply the knowledge gained from the literature review towards a lesson plan I have developed, looking at some of the literature review themes and how they tie into the specific objectives of my lesson plan. And I'd like to end my presentation today with a few suggestions for maintaining and sustaining a communicative language teaching environment in an English for academic purposes course. So, without further ado, let's dive in. So, considering the research question itself, I first want to touch on exactly what is communicative language teaching. Well, one definition of communicative language teaching is an approach that encourages real life communication in the classroom so students can be prepared to use that language outside of the classroom setting. So essentially, to reach a point where they feel that they are comfortable communicating in the target language, in the second language, and they can apply their skills successfully towards positive conversational outcomes outside of the classroom setting. And that leads me to the second part of my analysis, my introductory analysis, which is what exactly is English for academic purposes, or EAP? Well, an English for academic purposes course has a specific learning goal in mind from the beginning. Unlike a general communication class or a general ESL or general EFL class or learning English for basic communication purposes, an EAP class wants learners to develop an understanding of methods for truly emulating the speech standards of the second language culture and to essentially become part of what's seen as a target discourse community. So to feel fully accustomed, fully comfortable communicating effectively with people in that language community, essentially to ultimately develop the skills to communicate like a native speaker of that language. And that leads us to the entire purpose of my study. Why do we need to have a communicative language teaching environment within an English for academic purposes course? Well, obviously, considering my students who are hoping to progress on, receive their high school diploma, and potentially thereafter move on to take college level courses where they'll have to use English, they will need to have English at a higher academic level in order to be successful in their social interactions with one another, and of course also in their professional interactions, whether those professional interactions occur within an academic institution or those professional interactions occur within a job setting. Also, they will want to envision certain achievements. They, of course, as I mentioned, want to have strong communication skills, but also to have a real pragmatic understanding of the language culture in order to achieve cultural success. So, knowing how to interact correctly with other people, small talk conversations, as well as larger conversations that deal with specific subjects of academic inquiry, professional inquiry, students will need to have this level of confidence in order to successfully achieve certain outcomes within the target discourse community, within the second language culture. From the literature review, I was able to see 5 themes that came through. Some of the literature that I reviewed discussed the successful implementation of CLT, communicative language teaching, in EAP courses. Other bits of literature looked at challenges to active oral participation. Other literature suggested some alternative pedagogical approaches to enhance participation. Also, something that many of us may be familiar with as instructors would be logistical challenges to implementing CLT in an EAP course. Those could be seating arrangements. They could also be technological challenges that need to be overcome. And finally, a rather interesting bit of literature that I looked into was the need for more of a humanistic understanding of EAP's purposes. So rather than seeing EAP as simply something that's based in a classroom setting, to truly look at EAP in a larger framework as something that will instill within people a stronger sense of confidence to be able to do research and to be able to be professionally successful in the second language. So, from the literature review, some aspects that dealt with successful implementation of CLT in EAP courses, there was some information that discussed students' willingness to participate in oral discussions would increase, would be enhanced if they could truly see a personal investment in return upon the effort that they're putting into the language study. Trent noticed that students who could envision their learning as part of their imagined future professional educational experiences were much more likely to become heavily involved in oral participation because they found that there was something truly meaningful coming out of it. They could truly tie it into a pragmatic understanding of their future success. Another benefit that produced positive outcomes had to do with the teacher, rather than serving as a controller of knowledge, a controller of discourse, serving in more of a facilitator or a navigator role, guiding discussions, guiding students, which thereafter increased students' comfort level for asking questions. The researchers found that when the instructor stepped back and observed, it gave students time to create their own meaning from the text. They did not have to rely upon the teacher to dictate meaning, but they could truly look at the text and develop a sense of agency by developing meaning on their own. Uh, Another intriguing finding from Lowen and Basterkman regarding writing was that after teacher-led discourse on writing genres, students were able to use that knowledge in small group activities. So they did not need to rely upon the teacher to continue providing guidance. They were able to guide themselves after a certain level of instruction had been given to them. So this shows that students are capable of engaging in oral participation at a higher level in small group activities without the direct guidance of the instructor. Now, as we know, probably common knowledge as instructors, we inevitably face the issue of reticent students, students not willing to fully communicate in the language. There's a high degree of hesitation. So Soltani and Tron, in their research study, found that reticent students may be exercising a period of space to develop agency. They may not be immediately inclined to participate, and this could be seen as what they referred to as a proactive effort to create a safe space when they first interact with an unfamiliar learning environment. Now, of course, if you as the instructor want to get your students to begin speaking immediately, this can be rather frustrating. However, it may be beneficial to take a slight step backwards, allow that student time to create that level of confidence, that level of space, and thereafter communication may begin to occur on a more regular basis. Soltani and Tron found that with some students this was the case. Another major factor that could impact students' willingness to communicate would be cultural issues, and more specifically with power imbalances. Nakane noticed in her study that one more a silent student, I should say, or a student less willing to communicate in the language was paired with a more dominant student. And though the teacher had the best of intentions by putting this pairing together in order to invigorate the level of oral discourse in the classroom, it unfortunately had the adverse effect of making the student less willing to communicate. So a good consideration for an instructor is to try to observe the power imbalances or the power relationships in the classroom and try to find out the most conducive arrangements for students to develop that confidence to engage in oral participation in the classroom environment. Now, a suggested pedagogical approach to enhancing participation had to do with question types. Many times, a teacher may simply ask a question to confirm information he already knows. However, Urekli suggested that the type of questions that should be asked should be those that require a more detailed response. Urekli suggested using referential questions because they're more exploratory. They would encourage students to give longer, more complex answers and out of a range of possible or alternative answers. Another type of question that was recommended would be the use of elicitation questions. They can be used to confirm a student's understanding of content and linguistic knowledge. Both types of questions are fantastic approaches to use if the teacher is serving in more of a facilitator or navigator role in the classroom environment. So, of course, as teachers, we always enter the classroom. The seating arrangements are perfect. The technology is working without a problem. And hey, it's so easy to teach the class. If only that were the case. Unfortunately, as instructors, we know that we encounter logistical challenges to implementing the types of objectives in our classroom that we would like, and those that may inhibit developing a strong communicative language teaching environment. So one issue that was brought up by Farouk had to do with seating arrangements and deferring to first language, that these may inhibit the instructor's ability to implement CLT in an EAP course. Of course, if these do arise, it is a good idea for the teacher to be prepared for them and restructure lesson plans if these issues persist. If desks cannot be moved, sometimes the seating arrangements are really not overly practical for developing a communicative language teaching environment. The teacher should try his best to focus on pair work or group work with students sitting nearby. So essentially try to adapt to the circumstances at hand. And also helpful for a teacher to have a little bit of extra lesson material on hand, a toolbox of extra ideas to invigorate a class facing such issues. On a personal note, I have taught English as a second language for many years, and I have taught prior to the emergence of widespread technology. So I tried to have a lot of extra paper copies on hand. That may not be the most practical method, but on a personal level, that was something that I would do if certain logistical challenges or technological challenges arise so that I'm prepared to essentially expect the unexpected. Now, considering EAP is serving a purpose of trying to set students up for moving into research positions, potentially in academia or professional positions, Lee felt that EAP needs to possess more of a humanistic understanding. so that EAP is not simply seen as a classroom exercise, but has direct value in research. So skills, for example, in the lesson that I'll be showing, such as summarizing an article and preparing for an interview, would be seen as having practical and realistic value for the students. So uh, any way that an instructor can connect classroom activities with culture using English for research and professional pursuits will give students a real tangible need for that language ability, not something that's simply a classroom exercise, but something that has real purpose in their lives. So I'd now like to look a little bit at the lesson plan I developed, where I tried to integrate in some ideas from the literature review. So the lesson that I developed, it focuses on the development of a summary from a nonfiction article and oral class activities pertaining to future professional goals and interviewing. So my lesson involved a warm-up activity. I pre-taught vocabulary. Then we had an article activity where we listened, discussed the vocabulary, went through some comprehension questions, and I finished my lesson with activities that focused on future careers, interviewing, and to finish the class with students providing the results of their interviews and thereafter having a bit of a discussion on some of those interview responses. My warm-up activity was useful because it opened up students' minds to imagining their futures. It gave them an idea to envision their future professional endeavors. They would then be more willing to commit to the objectives of the lesson if they began to feel a very personal element behind the instruction, something that meant a lot to them. Pre-teaching vocabulary was beneficial because it provided students with the necessary terminology to discuss the lesson's objectives, which were to consider their future career focus, how they would plan for their future. Of course, the vocabulary being pre-taught was also helpful for summarizing the article, which did discuss future goals, future visions. So the lesson itself, the vocabulary was centered around the idea of focusing on the future with the immediately pragmatic goal of having students develop an understanding of how to correctly summarize an article. The article itself served a dual purpose. It provided an article to summarize, which was a necessary academic skill. It also gave students ideas to ponder for their future endeavors. The future career focus activity and the interviewing activity were able to give students an opportunity to complete a task working collaboratively. So that required them to discuss issues and to participate orally. And it also served the purpose of helping them to envision their future. So thereafter, giving them an idea of how to practically invest in their English language studies and to see possible future outcomes. So now that we've looked at the literature review that focused on methods and difficulties in implementing CLT within an EAP course, I wanted to finish my presentation today with a few suggestions from the literature review, task-based activities that are helpful for facilitating student-led dialogue, where students are required to work together in small group activities can be incredibly helpful. Um, Also serving in more of a facilitator role rather than a dominant role for the instructor is recommended. If you're encountering students who are very reticent, giving those students time to develop their voice in the language, developing that space can be beneficial. Also, if logistical and technological challenges arise, it is necessary to innovate and adapt if the circumstances are not opportune for CLT. And also using question types such as referential questions and elicitation questions can be very beneficial because they call upon the student to give a more comprehensive answer rather than just repeating information that is already known by the instructor. So these 5 suggestions I found to be incredibly helpful for enhancing CLT in an EAP course. Some material that I've used for this presentation that was part of my literature review, exploring teacher beliefs and teaching EAP at low proficiency levels. ideas and options in English for specific purposes, teaching by principles, an interactive approach to language pedagogy, privileging of speech in EAP and mainstream university classrooms, a critical review of participation, creating a communicative language teaching environment for improving students' communicative competence at EFL, EAP university level. What is EAP for multiple literacies to a humanistic paradigm shift? Interaction group writing tasks and genre-based instruction in an EAP classroom. 10 common job interview questions and how to answer them was helpful for developing one of the activities for my lesson. Also, an article that I used from the ReadWorks website entitled Predicting the Future was very helpful for focusing students' minds on their future goals. Examining space, silence, and agency and language socialization of an international student in the EAP and mainstream courses. Towards a pedagogical framework for participatory learning in EAP. Facilitator talk in EAP reading classes, and do current teaching methodologies really work in every context? So those were the articles and texts that I used for my literature review, as well as other research to include in this presentation. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that this was helpful for you, and I hope to have an opportunity to discuss these ideas with you more in the future. Have a wonderful day.